A shipwreck. 4 survivors, 3 men and 1 woman, struggling to survive. But soon, hunger, desire turned to rage, and on this cursed island, love became a weapon sharper than any blade. Traps were set. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of obsession, betrayal, and the island that swallows all who wash ashore. Welcome to the Island of Shadows. I'd love for you to stay with me on this journey. Please subscribe and keep the stories alive. The sea had been calm that night, eerily calm. The moon hung low and heavy, its pale light stretching across the water like a silver road. The ship rocked gently, a mother cradling her children in sleep. Even the creak of the wooden planks seemed comforting, a lullaby against the endless dark of the horizon. Ethan leaned on the deck rail, breathing in the salt air, trying to convince himself that the worst of their voyage was behind them. But peace on the ocean is fickle, and that night it betrayed them. The first rumble of thunder came like a whisper, distant and soft, too easily dismissed. But then came another, louder, rolling across the waves like a warning drum. Clouds gathered from nowhere, swallowing the moon. The stars vanished as if snuffed out by unseen fingers. Lightning cracked across the sky, jagged and violent, lighting the black sea in flashes. The wind rose with a shriek, cutting through ropes and sails, sending the vessel into a panicked sway. The crew shouted commands, but the storm did not care for human voices. Ethan barely had time to grab a rope before the first massive wave hit. The ship lurched, throwing men and women across the deck like rag dolls. Clara screamed, her slender figure slamming against a mast before Ethan caught her arm. Her dark hair clung to her pale face, and her green eyes, usually calm, gentle, were wide with terror. Marcus, built like an ox, bellowed curses into the gale, gripping the railing with arms thick as tree trunks. "Hold fast," he roared, though his voice was nearly swallowed by the wind. His bravado made him look unbreakable, but the storm tossed him about like a toy. David was not so fortunate. Thin, bookish, with a pair of cracked glasses that already fogged from the spray, he slipped on the drenched deck. His scream tore through the storm as his legs dangled over the edge. Ethan lunged, his muscles screaming with effort, and pulled him back just as another wave threatened to drag him under. The ship screamed as loudly as any of them. The mast cracked, snapping with a thunderous report that echoed like cannon fire. It fell in a spray of shattered wood, missing Ethan by mere inches. Sparks flew as rigging snapped. The vessel was being torn apart piece by piece like a carcass under a butcher's blade. "Swim!" Ethan shouted, forcing Clara toward the rail. His voice was nearly lost in the chaos, but she understood. Marcus was already climbing, trying to escape the splintering deck. David hesitated, eyes wild with panic, until another wave hit, nearly tossing them all into the sea. And then, water. Endless water. The ocean swallowed them whole. The world became a blur of salt, darkness, and panic. Ethan fought for air, his arms burning as he clung to a floating spar. Beside him, Clara sputtered and coughed, reaching blindly until his hand closed around hers. David's thin frame bobbed in the waves, his cracked glasses lost forever to the sea. Marcus cursed and roared, his broad shoulders rising and falling as he kicked against the current, refusing to be beaten even by the ocean itself. Time lost meaning. Hours, or perhaps mere moments, were consumed in a haze of survival, each breath a battle, each wave a mountain. The sea showed no mercy, tossing them farther and farther from the wreckage of their lives. When at last dawn came, it was not with warmth or promise. The sky was gray, the sun weak and pale. The survivors were spat onto a shore of black rocks and coarse sand, their bodies trembling and broken. Clara lay coughing, her blouse torn, her face streaked with salt water and tears. Marcus sprawled face down, unmoving until Ethan kicked him sharply, forcing a groan from his lips. David shivered, his thin body curled in on itself, trembling as if he could never be warm again. Ethan stood unsteadily, staring first at the sea, where the broken skeleton of their ship floated in splinters, and then at the land before them. A jungle loomed, thick and dark, its canopy a wall of twisting shadows. The trees rose high and claw-like, their branches curling as though to trap them within. Strange cries echoed from the undergrowth, carried on the damp air. There were no huts, no fires, no people. They were alone, and the island was waiting. The first day passed in a haze of exhaustion. Their bodies, battered by the sea, moved only because survival demanded it. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, jagged black rocks jutting out like broken teeth. The sun was merciless, baking their salt-crusted skin until every step felt like fire. Clara was the first to speak of thirst. Her lips were cracked, her voice brittle as parchment. "Water," she whispered, swaying as she walked. "We need water." Marcus grunted, dragging himself over the sand like a wounded animal. "Then we head inland. The jungle will have streams." Ethan stopped, turning sharply. His dark hair clung to his forehead, his jaw tight. "No, we don't rush in blind. We don't know what's in there." He gestured at the wall of greenery, a dark fortress pressing against the beach. The jungle seemed to breathe, alive with rustles and strange cries. Even in daylight, it was a place of menace. David sat hunched on a rock, adjusting the bent frame of his cracked glasses. "If we don't drink soon, it won't matter what's in there." His voice trembled with logic, but his eyes darted nervously toward the shadows between the trees. Hours dragged on, the sun climbing higher, their tongues swelling with dryness. The sea taunted them with its endless, undrinkable water, waves hissing as though mocking their suffering. Eventually, thirst broke Ethan's resolve. "Fine," he said, scanning the tree line. "We go in, but carefully. Stay close." The jungle greeted them like a predator. Heat wrapped around them, thick and wet, pressing into their lungs. The air buzzed with unseen insects, a constant drone that crawled into their ears. Vines hung like snakes, brushing against their faces. The ground was soft and uneven, every step sinking into damp soil. Marcus hacked at low branches with a jagged piece of driftwood, forcing a path forward. He was a wall of muscle, sweat dripping from his scarred face, his frustration boiling over with every swing. "This is wasting time," he growled. "There has to be water." "Listen," Ethan snapped, "you can't just charge through. You'll get us lost." Their bickering ended only when Clara gasped and pointed. Ahead, through the thick undergrowth, a faint trickling sound teased their ears. They pushed toward it, the sound growing louder, until at last they stumbled upon salvation, a narrow stream winding between mossy rocks. The water was cold and clear, running fast over smooth stones. They dropped to their knees without hesitation, cupping handfuls to their lips, gulping greedily. Ethan drank deeply but forced himself to pause, to check Clara. She was bent low, her face flushed, drinking like someone who had been lost in the desert for days. David fell to his stomach, letting the stream pour directly into his mouth. His thin body shook with relief. Marcus splashed water over his face, laughing harshly, as though he had conquered the island itself. When their thirst was finally quenched, exhaustion overtook them. They collapsed on the bank, guys too tired to argue, too full of water to think. The canopy above them swayed, blotting out the sky, and the jungle hummed with its strange music. Clara curled against Ethan's shoulder, trembling slightly even in her sleep. That night, hunger came. By the light of the pale moon, their stomachs growled with cruel insistence. Marcus prowled the trees, ripping down strange fruits. He bit into one, only to spit it out, grimacing. Sour. Poison, maybe. David tried to fashion snares from vines, setting crude loops along the stream. His hands shook, clumsy from weakness, and by morning the traps held nothing but broken twigs. Hunger gnawed at them for days, a rat chewing inside their bellies. Ethan took charge, his calm voice steadying the others. He showed them how to crack open coconuts with stones, how to sharpen sticks into fishing spears. He stood waist-deep in the stream, striking at darting shadows until at last he brought back fish, glistening and wriggling in his hands. Clara's eyes lit with gratitude as she helped him cook it over a small fire. But Marcus watched. His gaze lingered not on the fish, but on Clara, on how she leaned close to Ethan, how she laughed softly at his words, how she touched his arm as though he were the only solid thing left in their broken world. That night, the jungle grew crueler. Strange cries echoed from the shadows, animal sounds warped into something almost human. Red eyes glowed faintly from the undergrowth, vanishing when the firelight touched them. Smoke from their fire brought swarms of biting insects, tormenting them even in sleep. Clara huddled close to Ethan, whispering that she was afraid. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, murmuring promises of protection. Marcus sat apart, the firelight dancing across his clenched jaw. He sharpened a crude spear, his gaze fixed not on the jungle, but on Clara. The island had given them water, but it demanded something in return. Days turned into weeks, and survival carved itself into routine. The island gave little, and what it gave, it demanded sweat, blood, and fear in return. They built a crude shelter from palm leaves and fallen branches, leaning it against a cluster of rocks for protection. It kept the rain off their heads, though the wind still crept through the gaps at night, chilling them to the bone. The days were hot, wet, and suffocating. The air clung to their skin like a damp shroud, and their clothes, once neat, hung in tatters. At night, the temperature dropped, and strange howls echoed through the jungle, chilling them more deeply than the cold ever could. Ethan had become their anchor. He taught David how to sharpen sticks into fishing spears, showed Clara how to gather coconuts and split them with stones. He even managed to catch a wild bird once, bringing it back to camp with a calm smile. Each small success lifted their spirits. Marcus hated it. "Why do we follow you?" Marcus sneered one night, his scarred face lit orange by the fire. His broad shoulders were tense, his fists tight. "You're no stronger than me." "Because I'm keeping us alive." Ethan replied evenly, not rising to the bait. His voice was calm, measured, but his eyes never left Marcus. Clara sat between them, pretending to busy herself with the fish roasting over the fire, but she was listening. She always listened. Her green eyes softened when Ethan spoke. Her laughter came easier around him, and her hand brushed his arm when she thought no one noticed. But Marcus noticed. He noticed every touch, every glance, every laugh. His jaw clenched tighter with each passing day. He hunted deeper into the jungle than the rest dared, returning with fish dripping blood, with birds whose wings still twitched. He dragged his kills to the camp and tossed them down with a grin meant for Clara. "See what I can do," he boasted, chest heaving, muscles slick with sweat. Not bad for someone who isn't the leader. Clara only thanked Ethan when he showed her how to cook it. David watched all of this in silence. He admired Ethan, trusted him even, but sometimes when the firelight hit Clara's face just right, when she laughed, when she leaned close to Ethan, jealousy stirred in his chest too. His admiration carried a quiet longing, a desperation he dared not speak. Tension became a fifth member of their camp. It sat by the fire, slept under the shelter, followed them into the jungle. The fragile balance of survival, food, water, shelter, was not enough to keep their hearts steady. One night, Clara awoke to find Marcus watching her across the fire. His eyes burned in the dark, not with hunger for food, but for something else. She turned quickly, curling closer to Ethan, and closed her eyes. But she did not sleep. The island had given them the tools to live. Now it seemed determined to see what they would do with their desires. By the third month, unspoken tension had curdled into something heavier, something they could no longer ignore. Hunger was still constant, the work endless, but the greater strain came from within. Clara had become the center of their small, fragile world. Even ragged, with her white blouse torn and her hair tangled, she was striking. Her green eyes shone in the firelight like emeralds. Her laughter, rare though it was, cut through the darkness like sunlight. She was more than companionship. She was civilization itself, a reminder of life before the storm, before the island. To Ethan, she was hope. To Marcus, she was a prize. To David, she was both comfort and torment. Ethan tried to keep his distance, though Clara often gravitated toward him. When he taught her how to weave vines into ropes, she leaned close, listening to every word. When he returned from fishing, she smiled as though he had carried back a feast. Ethan never encouraged her openly, but even he could not deny how his chest tightened when she touched his arm or laughed at his dry humor. Marcus saw it all. His resentment grew with every passing day. He boasted loudly of his strength, made sure Clara watched when he carried the heaviest logs or dragged bloody fish into camp. He flexed his muscles in the firelight, scars catching the glow like badges of honor. But Clara's gaze drifted past him, always back to Ethan. One evening, Marcus broke the silence. His voice was low, heavy with challenge. "Don't think she's yours." Ethan looked up from the fire. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen the way she looks at me," Marcus said, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile. "She doesn't want a man who plays with coconuts and fish. She wants strength. She wants me." Clara stiffened. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then to Marcus, then back again. Her silence was louder than words. "She's not a prize," Ethan said at last, his patience thinning. His calm tone carried an edge of steel. She chooses for herself. Then let her choose, Marcus growled, leaning forward, his massive hands clenched. The fire crackled between them, its light dancing across their faces. Clara's lips parted, as though to speak, but no words came. She only lowered her eyes, her hand resting unconsciously on Ethan's knee. David sat apart, staring at the flames as though they might swallow him. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "We'll tear ourselves apart." The jungle seemed to agree. That night, the fire sputtered and nearly died, and from the trees came laughter, high, sharp cries that might have been animals, or might have been something else. Red eyes glowed just beyond the circle of light, vanishing whenever someone looked directly at them. Clara shivered and drew closer to Ethan. Marcus watched, his jaw tight, his knuckles white around the spear he refused to set down. David turned away, eyes wet with something between fear and longing. The island pressed in around them, a silent witness to their unraveling. Desire had taken root, and with it came jealousy, anger, and the first whispers of violence. Marcus became restless. The firelight no longer satisfied him. The daily routine of gathering food and building shelter felt like chains. His gaze, once focused on survival, turned darker, sharper, like a predator circling prey. It started with animal traps. He dug pits in the soft soil, sharpened stakes hidden beneath leaves, and strung crude snares between trees. At first, they were practical, meant for wild pigs or birds. But soon the traps became intricate, almost artistic in their cruelty. David nearly fell into one the second morning after Marcus had set it along the jungle path. The pit was narrow, lined with sharpened sticks and hidden beneath a thin layer of foliage. His foot gave way, and a scream tore from his throat. Ethan lunged just in time, grabbing his arm and hauling him back to safety. Marcus appeared moments later, wiping sweat from his brow. He smirked as though David's terror was part of some private joke. "For pigs," he said casually, though his eyes glimmered with something far colder. "You could kill us!" Ethan yelled, fury lacing his voice. "This is insane!" "Maybe that's the point," Marcus replied, shrugging, as if death were as casual as breathing. After that, caution became constant. Every step into the jungle was shadowed by fear, every rustle of leaves a potential death trap. Clara clung to Ethan at night, whispering that she could no longer feel safe anywhere. Even David, usually quiet and timid, flinched at the sound of his own footsteps. Marcus's obsession with control became clear. He didn't just want to survive. He wanted power, dominance over every movement, every glance, every small decision in camp. Food became less important than fear. Ethan attempted to counteract it. He examined the traps during the day, disarming or marking them. But Marcus always returned the next morning, rebuilding them with even more cunning. The jungle seemed to play along, hiding pitfalls beneath ferns and vines, turning every path into a gamble. Clara's patience wore thin. She hated the constant tension, the stifling dread that hung over their camp like smoke. At night, when the firelight flickered across the jungle, her green eyes darted into the shadows as if expecting Marcus himself to rise from the darkness, spear in hand. David, usually so methodical, began to falter. His hands shook as he attempted to set traps for food, aware now that any misstep might mean his death. Marcus would watch him, silent, until the fear became almost unbearable. Ethan realized that the island had changed them. It wasn't only Marcus who had shifted. The pressure of survival, isolation, and hunger had infected all of them. He could see the tension coiling in David's shoulders, in Clara's grip on his arm, even in himself. By the fourth week, it was clear. The island was no longer a prison. It had become a battlefield. Survival meant more than fish, water, or shelter. It meant navigating jealousy, desire, and treachery with the same careful precision as the traps in the jungle. The fire crackled low that night, casting long shadows across Marcus's lean, scarred face. He smiled, sharp and dangerous, and Ethan felt the first prickling certainty that the worst of the island's lessons had yet to come. The tension that had simmered for weeks finally erupted one humid afternoon. Ethan had been scouting along the stream, testing fishing traps, when a sharp tug at his ankle nearly sent him sprawling. He looked down in horror to see a vine snare coiled around his leg, the crude knots digging into his skin. "Marcus," he shouted, panic and fury mingling in his voice. His heart pounded as he struggled against the tightening noose. The rope threatened to snap his ankle, or worse. A scream split the air. Clara had been following behind, barefoot, and her voice pierced the thick, damp jungle like a bell of warning. She came running, hands slashing at the vines until Ethan wrenched free, gasping for air, his muscles trembling from exertion. From the shadows, Marcus emerged, leaning against a tree, a grin spreading across his scarred face. "You should have died," he said casually, his voice dripping with malice. "Then she'd be free to choose." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "You're insane," he spat. David, arriving moments later, froze at the sight. His thin frame shook as he took in the trap, the tension between the men, and the fire in Clara's eyes. "You're mad," he whispered, voice trembling. Marcus stepped closer, spear in hand, and for a moment it seemed as though blood would be spilled. The jungle held its breath with them, the wind rustling the leaves like distant whispers. Birds flew screaming overhead, startled by the violence. Clara's green eyes blazed. She stepped between Marcus and David, her small frame taut with determination. "Enough!" she cried, her voice strong, far stronger than her body suggested. "If you don't stop, you'll all die, and I'll be left alone." Her words, sharp as the blade of a knife, held them at bay. Marcus's grin faltered, but only slightly, and he leaned back, studying her as though she were a curious creature. Ethan felt his own heart hammering, not just from the close call with the snare, but from seeing Clara stand so fearlessly. David lowered his hands, still trembling, but his eyes never left Marcus. "She's right," he muttered. "We can't keep this up. We'll destroy ourselves before the island does." The jungle seemed to echo their sentiments. A branch cracked somewhere deeper in the undergrowth. A rustling passed overhead, and for a brief moment it felt as though unseen eyes were watching, waiting for the first act of betrayal to spill blood. That night, the camp was silent, except for the occasional splash in the stream and the hum of insects. Ethan and Clara huddled together, both shaken but relieved. Marcus sat apart, sharpening his spear methodically, his dark eyes calculating. David retreated further, trembling, unsure whether to sleep or flee. Ethan realized that nothing had truly ended. Clara's words had only delayed the inevitable. Marcus's madness had not abated. It had only been restrained for now. The jungle loomed around them, oppressive, almost sentient. Its dense foliage hid countless dangers. Not only animals, but traps, and now human desire twisted into violence. Every day forward would be a test, a struggle not just against the island, but against one another. Hunger, fear, and the unspoken war for Clara's attention had made enemies of them all. The island had claimed their innocence. The first betrayals had been laid bare, and Ethan understood with a sinking certainty that survival alone would not be enough to save them. The snare had been a warning. The jungle, Marcus, and even the other survivors had revealed the truth. Trust was a currency none of them could afford. The days dragged onward in a haze of heat, humidity, and the ever-present hum of the jungle. Hunger gnawed relentlessly at their bellies, but another, darker appetite had begun to assert itself. Desire, jealousy, and the cruel games of the mind. Marcus's obsession with Clara had grown into something malignant. Every glance, every word, every small act was calculated, a test of control over the fragile balance of their camp. One evening, the fire sputtered low. The sky overhead was a bruised purple, clouds thick and heavy with moisture. Marcus sat back, glancing from Clara to Ethan and David, his scarred face unreadable in the dim light. Then, almost casually, he spoke. "We'll share her," he said flatly. Silence fell. Even the insects seemed to hush. Ethan froze, heart hammering. "What? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice taut with disbelief. Marcus's grin was cold, a predator's smile. "Each of us gets turns. That way, no one fights. No more jealousy, no more conflict. Fair, simple." Clara recoiled, her green eyes flashing with disgust. "I'm not yours to share," she said, voice sharp and trembling. "I am not an object." David paled, his thin frame sagging in horror. "You can't be serious," he whispered, voice breaking. This is insane." Marcus shrugged, leaning back on his arms, his gaze fixed on her. "Survival is more than food. Men need more than fish and coconuts. And loneliness, it destroys the mind. This is practical." Ethan's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. "You're a madman," he said, each word a low growl. "And if you even think about it." Clara stepped between them, her small frame trembling with fury. "Stop," she cried, eyes blazing. "You think I am weak? You think I am yours to take? I am not a prize, not a toy, not an escape from your misery." Her words hung in the humid air like thunder. For a moment, Marcus stared, momentarily disarmed, though the hunger in his eyes did not fade. David's resolve wavered as he listened, half nodding in despair, as though Marcus's madness was contagious. Ethan, though he refused to consider Marcus's proposal, felt a gnawing unease. Even he, the calmest among them, realized that the island was twisting their minds. The long days of hunger, the ceaseless pressure of survival, the isolation, it was all a poison. That night, sleep came fitfully. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that moved in the flickering firelight, felt like a threat. Clara curled against Ethan, whispering that she would never yield, that she would survive. But even her voice trembled. Marcus prowled the edges of the fire, sharpening his spear, his dark eyes glinting in the low light. David sat away from the circle, haunted by Marcus's words, by the unthinkable suggestion that survival could demand moral surrender. Ethan realized the truth. The pact had not been made, but the damage had been done. Something had shifted irreversibly. They were no longer simply survivors. They were predators, circling prey. Even if that prey had teeth, even if that prey was not so easily dominated. The jungle seemed to respond to their tension. Strange cries echoed from unseen depths, the trees whispered in the wind, and somewhere in the shadows, a presence felt alive and watchful. Hunger, fear, and desire had begun to merge, creating a force far more dangerous than any wild beast. The island had not only trapped their bodies, it had ensnared their minds, and the first fractures in their humanity had already begun. The night was thick, the jungle a suffocating wall of shadow and sound. The fire burned low, casting long, wavering shapes across the ground. Marcus and David slept nearby, exhausted by the day's hunt, unaware of the silent figure moving just beyond the circle of firelight. Clara was not the frightened girl they had known. Months of fear, hunger, and manipulation had forged something sharper within her, a survival instinct honed to a lethal edge. Her hands were steady now, and her breath quiet. In her palm rested a sharpened stone, small but deadly, honed against rocks along the shore. She paused at Ethan's side, placing a finger gently on his lips. "Sleep," she whispered, her voice steady and calm, betraying none of the storm inside her. Ethan's dark eyes opened, widened, but he did not move. He trusted her instinctively. With the silence of a shadow, Clara moved toward Marcus first. He lay sprawled, unaware, his chest rising and falling with deep, careless breaths. One swift motion, one precise strike, and the stone bit into the thick flesh of his neck. The gurgling sound that followed seemed to swallow the night, a harsh echo in the dense jungle. David stirred, startled by the noise. Clara's eyes met his across the dim light. He was already reaching for his spear, but before he could fully act, she struck again, this time at his chest. The cry that escaped him was sharp, final, and he crumpled to the ground. Ethan sprang up, horror and disbelief written across his face. "Clara!" he shouted, but she pressed a hand to his chest, stopping him from moving closer. Her green eyes, once soft and cautious, were now hard, fierce, untouchable. What have you done?" Ethan whispered, his voice breaking with a mix of fear and awe. "What had to be done?" she replied, calm, collected, almost eerily so. Her hands were slick with blood, but she made no motion to hide it. "They would have killed you. They would have taken me." Ethan stared, comprehension dawning. The girl he had tried to protect, the one he had admired and cared for, had been transformed. The island had sharpened her like the stone in her hand, molded her into a predator capable of cold, precise action. Silence reclaimed the camp. The fire sputtered weakly, the jungle's usual hum returning, but now it felt different, like the trees themselves were acknowledging the shift in power. Clara moved back to Ethan, standing tall despite the exhaustion that should have claimed her. "We survive," she said simply, "but no one will take what is ours again." Ethan nodded, still trying to reconcile the girl he had known with the woman before him. She had survived in a world that had tried to destroy her, and in doing so, she had taken control of her fate and of the island. The night stretched long, the fire dim, and shadows creeping over the bodies of the men who had been threats. The jungle, once oppressive and alive with unseen menace, seemed to step back, as if respecting the new order. Clara and Ethan huddled close, their bodies pressed together, not in fear but in determination. They were the only ones left, and survival now depended on their ability to trust each other completely. The island had claimed lives, twisted minds, and tested humanity. Clara had learned its lessons, and in doing so, had become something neither Marcus nor David had anticipated, a force of her own. But even with the threats gone, the island had not loosened its grip. Food was scarce, water uncertain, and the jungle remained an unpredictable, menacing presence. Hunger would not wait, and survival would demand more than courage. For a time, their lives seemed safer. Marcus and David were gone, and the immediate threat of violence had vanished. But the island did not forgive, and it did not rest. Hunger remained, sharper now, relentless and merciless. Food became scarce in ways they hadn't anticipated. The fish in the stream grew fewer, darting beneath rocks where their spears could not reach. Wild birds vanished into the dense canopy, their calls distant echoes. Even coconuts, once plentiful, now clung stubbornly to tall trees, their tough husks resisting every attempt to pry them down. The stream, once a lifeline, slowed to a trickle under the oppressive summer sun. Ethan's body weakened. His strong arms trembled with exhaustion, his face gaunt. Every meal felt like a victory, yet it never lasted. Clara, too, felt the cruel effects of deprivation. Her once bright eyes grew duller, her movements slower, as the fever of starvation gnawed at her from within. She murmured Marcus's name in her sleep, haunted by the specter of those who had sought to control her. They scavenged the jungle each day, each step a gamble. The undergrowth seemed to close in around them, the shadows longer, darker. Strange noises rose from the trees, chirps, screeches, and cries that might have been animal, might have been echoes of the dead. Ethan swore he saw movement among the vines, phantom shapes that vanished when he focused. Their dreams became a theater of hunger and terror. Ethan awoke to visions of roasted meat, of feasts just beyond reach. Clara's night terrors were worse. She screamed, tossed, and whispered names of those long gone. David's face appeared to both of them, pale and accusing, eyes wide with disbelief at her ruthless actions. Ethan tried to maintain their fragile routine. He sharpened spears, fished when the water allowed, and climbed trees for coconuts. Clara assisted, but her body betrayed her. Her steps faltered, and her breaths came in ragged gasps. The psychological strain was worse than the physical. Every sound in the jungle felt threatening. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward them with malicious intent. Hunger amplified their paranoia. They questioned whether the footsteps in the night were real or imagined. Ethan sometimes heard Marcus and David calling from the undergrowth, their voices distant yet insistent, mocking, reminding him of the bloodshed. One afternoon, Clara collapsed near the stream. Ethan caught her, dragging her into the shade. Her green eyes, once so sharp and determined, now seemed glassy and distant. I can't, she whispered, trembling. You can, Ethan replied, pressing a hand to her back. We survive, together. But the island did not wait. The sun beat down, insects buzzed with relentless persistence, and the hunger gnawed at every joint, every sinew, every thought. Even hope became a luxury they could no longer afford. They realized the true curse of the island was not just the threat of violence or betrayal, it was the slow, inevitable erosion of strength, spirit, and sanity. Each day was a battle, each night a struggle against the shadow of their own bodies. By evening, the stream was lower still. The fire burned weakly, their meals meager. They huddled close, a single fortress against the vast, indifferent jungle. Hunger had taken its toll, and they were only beginning to feel its final, cruel weight. The island had removed the predators from their midst, but it remained a master of its own cruel design. Survival was no longer merely a question of strength. It was a question of endurance, of will, of whether the human mind could resist the slow erosion of starvation and despair. There was no storm, no final battle, no rescue waiting beyond the jungle, only hunger, relentless and merciless, and the oppressive weight of the island itself. The days blurred together, each one an echo of the last, marked only by the diminishing strength in their limbs and the ever-hollow ache in their stomachs. Clara grew weak first. Her steps faltered, her breath shallow and fast. The fire they had built flickered weakly as Ethan carried her through the dense undergrowth, every movement a struggle. Her once sharp green eyes were dim, clouded by fever and exhaustion. I thought you'd save me, she whispered, her voice so thin it was almost lost to the heavy air. Ethan, himself gaunt and hollow-eyed, felt each step as if he were moving through water. I tried, he said, holding her hand, pressing her frail body close to his chest. But words, like their bodies, were failing him. Each day he watched the light in her eyes fade further, her once indomitable will now a fragile ember. They scavenged when they could, but the island offered little. The stream was almost dry, fish had disappeared, and the fruit that clung stubbornly to trees was too high or bitter to eat. Even coconuts, which had once sustained them, now seemed unreachable, mocking their desperation. The jungle, ever alive, pressed in around them. The cries of unseen animals echoed with uncanny eeriness. Leaves rustled with movements that were perhaps just wind, or perhaps the restless spirits of the men they had left behind. David and Marcus lingered in memory, their absence a shadow over every step. Hunger turned the island itself into a predator, each tree, vine, and stone a potential enemy. Days passed in this slow, agonizing rhythm. Time became meaningless. They counted only the hours between hunger and fainting, between weakness and exhaustion. Their bodies wasted, their minds frayed, and still the island claimed them, inch by inch. One evening, under a sky streaked with bruised purples and deep blacks, Clara could walk no longer. Ethan laid her on the dirt, brushing her damp hair from her forehead. "I can't," she murmured, voice barely audible. "You don't have to," Ethan whispered, his own body trembling, tears tracking lines through the grime on his face. He sank to the ground beside her, letting the weight of their shared failure press down. They held hands, two shadows fading into one, silent in their surrender. Days merged into nights, and nights into more days. The fire died. The stream dried. Their shelter, once a crude fortress of branches and leaves, was slowly reclaimed by vines and creeping plants. Birds called above, indifferent to the lives fading below. The sea lapped against the rocks in its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the suffering it had once mocked. When their final breaths left their bodies, there was no fanfare, no scream, no storm, no vindication, only silence. The island remained, eternal, vast, and indifferent, its secrets intact, its horrors waiting for the next souls foolish enough to enter its grasp. Ethan and Clara lay side by side, skin pale and sunken, hands clasped even in death. Their story had ended as the island had dictated, slow, merciless, and complete. The jungle whispered, the sea lapped, and the island waited.